Radio. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5 RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio. Hey, good afternoon. It's the 31st of July, and it's a balmy 299 degrees Kelvin outside. That's like 80-something degrees, I believe, Fahrenheit. It's pretty nice out, actually. It's actually really nice. There are parts of the country where it's probably like, 100 degrees already, and maybe more.
Supposedly it's 81 out right now.
81's pretty nice. That's pretty comfortable. It's the kind of thing that makes me appreciate where we are right now, because I know it can get pretty hot in some parts of the country, especially.
Well, this is the first year that they've named the heat wave.
They named a heat wave this year. Seriously.
Yeah, named Zoe.
I guess that's a good name. Zoe brings the heat.
Yeah, it hit Seville, Spain 5 days ago, hitting 110, past 110 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
And it's not, well, I guess it's about to be the first day of August.
My understanding is that there are significant portions of Europe that, partially due to like latitude, but also due to altitude, they don't have air conditioning at all. Like none. It's kind of like the Seattle situation where it only had to get so hot for it to become an actual problem because there's no air conditioning. There's no culture of air conditioning. Just open the windows and turn on a fan. And so when Britain had their heat wave, that was the problem they were facing. So I imagined the same thing, which is rough.
Well, the infrastructure wouldn't be able to handle a ton of new air conditioners anyway, more than likely.
Well, that's even scarier.
You see it in Texas happening.
Yeah.
Now.
Well, that's a thing that everyone's going to have to reconcile pretty quickly, especially if the world wants to transition to electric vehicles. If we can't handle the burden of air conditioning, that seems like it should be a similar kind of current draw to charging a vehicle, right?
I guess it depends on the space, and this is one of the things that, now that we are getting towards a point where our planet's ability to sustain human life is like in question, the size of a space that needs to be air conditioned is 100% like correlated with not 100%, but you know what I mean? The space is like correlated with the amount of energy necessary to cool that space, which is where like people leaning towards huge residences and 7 and 8 bedroom homes or whatever the fuck, and having to then cool these entire places. That's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, like people who have a home basketball court and that also keep it air conditioned 24/7. Yeah, we're talking about you. It is pretty badass if somebody has a home basketball court. I'm not going to lie. That's pretty dope. But also, Yeah, I've seen some houses that are sitting on top of basements that are just as large as the house. And the basements are always like, cave cold. Maybe there's something to houses that are partially underground or underground enough that they break that the thermocline, that heat transition where it just becomes temperature stable.
Yeah, that's part of the reason to like leverage the environment with, you know, the the abode that is being built, which is where like actual abodes are built into the earth, and that's why they cool and heat really well. Or I guess Adobe, um, like Adobe abodes. It's really funny, like the word abode itself, like,
Wait,
and the notion of like,
Adobe abode, is that like some kind of palindrome?
like the Adobe style buildings, and then the notion of an abode is like, I don't think they're, you know, linguistically tied together. It's just the funny like proximity of those words, and the way that like a lot of the homes are not really natural and are really far away from like Adobe style building, and by proxy, like they don't really feel like homes. A lot of places feel like sterile or unlivable in one way or another. And that's where like, you know, I don't I don't really feel like a lot of buildings that people call their homes are actual abodes in that sense.
I think there's kind of like a future retro look to modern Adobe constructions because a lot of it's just Adobe over brick, or sometimes it's just stone emulating that like an old Adobe style. At least when I'm looking at it at a modern Adobe images on Google. Some of it still looks pretty cool. Some of it looks like it belongs on a Star Trek Next Generation set. So, retro future now. Yeah, retro future. That's what a lot of these buildings look like to me. I think that there's a lot to be said for materials that come from the earth, like, and directly from the surrounding environment. Like a lot of these buildings look like they fit in their environments. They don't just look like somebody plopped a Menards.
Right, they had no choice.
Yeah.
They had no choice because of the materials, which is also why like you don't get basements in deserts regions or places with like a ton of bedrock. Like it's really difficult to dig into the bedrock,
You
and
gotta
by
blast
proxy
into it.
yeah. So
Well, if you live in the desert, there's always the concern that a huge ass sandstorm's going to bury your house. So it's got to be, structurally sound enough to withstand that kind of beating. There's a lot going on in these buildings.
well, and then there's like when they build subterranean homes, it's like those also cool and heat naturally as much as possible with the earth. So it's like it's not that they don't need extra heating and cooling now, but when there was no extra uh, pollution going into the atmosphere, it's like, yeah, the natural heating and cooling does enough because we're not adding on top of the natural cycles. And I think that's ultimately, you have a ton of people in America who refuse to understand how global climate systems work, and then who also believe in their belief usurping science.
Man, there are people who still think that like the carbon cycle and radiocarbon dating are like the same thing. So if that's a barrier to understanding like an energy continuum, then it's a lot more complicated to explain than just, you know, the carbon cycle. I think that we're kind of divorced from the idea that these things are separate, but petrochemicals are not part of the carbon cycle. And so everything that's related to that, plastics, rubber compounds, every fuel, every lubricant, every solvent, hygiene products, beauty products, you name it, like literally everything. I look around me and everything around me has some kind of plastic or coating or rubberized, you know, whatever, oils. And all these things are part of a petroleum cycle, which the carbon cycle can kind of return things to itself readily and quickly. The petroleum cycle, though, that's like thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, millions of years. And so we're burning through petroleum at a unbelievable rate. And that's not being returned to but it's producing carbon, but it's not actually part of the carbon cycle. It's just adding more carbon. Eventually it starts to sound kind of like, you know, sky is falling type shit.
I mean, it's just a matter of like how do you express to people who don't care about polluting what they're doing harms other people? It's like, you know, when someone smokes cigarettes and they don't care that their secondhand smoke can give other people cancer, like what do you do with that person? And what do you do when there's 100 million of those types of people? It's like the only thing we can do is make it impossible for them to just buy their way into these activities, because ultimately the idea that capitalism should be able to like empower people to purchase a way to destroy the planet is fucking, it's nonsensical. And I think we've gotten to a point where there are people who make it seem like capitalism should also like allow you to just buy anything, but those are the same people who would try to let slavery come back into legality. So it's like we're dealing with people who are willing to be extremist about property to the point where they would very likely be advocating for humans as property, because they're fine with it when it's invisible. They're fine with it when it's like, you know, child labor in other countries, as long as they don't have to see some like white American child doing white child labor, it's okay. And we, you know, that shit used to happen. There's like these images of a 3-year-old coal miner floating around on social media from like the early 1900s, and it's like, that's sad and all, but that shit's still happening in like countries where Western intervention encourages illegal mining behaviors that then get the same shit happening. And just as long as it's not visible to Americans, like, or after the West,
well, a lot of the
encouraged it, then they'll ask for money to go save the people from that. Yeah, so it's this.
Even when they ask for money, they're showing images of kids picking up rocks, and it's really innocuous because it just looks like a rock. It doesn't say cobalt. I'm going to give this kid cancer by the time he's 25.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't communicate that at all. It just communicates.
Meanwhile,
poverty.
there's starving kids and starving white kids in Appalachia.
Yeah.
Living in squalor. millions of starving white kids in Appalachia.
There are millions of kids across the country who rely on
Across the country
who
too.
rely on school lunch programs to get, like, nutritional needs met. So it's not even just that. It's like, this is actually kind of a problem. Holy crap, that's the famine. So we got plague, which is the pestilence. We've got famine, and there's war. And where's death happening? Probably somewhere. Like, the four horsemen are all present now, present and accounted for. I was just thinking about this earlier. I'm not trying to get all biblical or anything like that. I was just thinking about that because of X-Men.
Yeah, I don't. It's like, I I look at all of the ways that prophecies have been constructed, and it's always so loose and like nebulous that it's really easy to impose at any given time if you have a global view. But that's also making it seem as if like America is like the hub of humanity. Oh, everything depends on America. Not really. It's more so everything depends on America not lashing out with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And the same goes with like Russia. As long as America and Russia don't fucking lash out like little babies, the rest of humanity will be fine. But the problem is these fucking self-righteous white supremacist infrastructures won't allow the rest of the world to thrive. As long as like they exist, the rest of the world has to be in squalor to ensure that white people in these countries feel like they're better than somebody else.
Yeah, so
and that's like by any means necessary, and that includes sending in armed fucking mercenaries to pretend that this coup is natural and organic and not coming from the American government.
Did you read about the successful test of the heavy payload rocket from China? How portions of the rocket crashed back down into the Indian Ocean.
Oh yeah.
But how like a lot of Western media left out the whole part that it was calculated like precisely where it was going to land within like a 5 mile radius. They knew where it was.
Of course, they left that part out.
Of course, they left that. They were in complete
Yeah.
communication with India the whole time. They're like, "Hey, this is going to happen. This is happening. We're just letting you know." And it's not like the United States and Russia and ESA and every space agency leading up to the launches of whatever rocket program they were all dropping off portions of their rockets in some ocean somewhere, and it was all coordinated. They're just mad because it took them 50, 60 years to do what China did in 20.
Yeah.
But China's going to screw it up, of course, because they screwed it up a few times. They had stuff violently explode, so of course it's going to happen. Well, I mean, it's space exploration and shit's going to happen, right? It can't not happen. Something's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of projection that happens with American incompetence that then gets pushed off. It's so crazy to then see people who are like, who would identify themselves as like left or left leaning, see some shit that's happening in America, and it's like, what is this, Saudi Arabia? It's like, can you like not compare American bullshit to Islamic bullshit? Challenge, please. Because yeah, Islamic countries aren't perfect, but it's like, it's really funny to especially see the abortion example. It's like, no, their religion doesn't outlaw abortion. So let's stop right there and stop acting like banning abortion is like some super Islamic thing when their religion just straight up actually protects it. So it's like, it's in certain cases. It's not complete. It's not like, oh, you can get an abortion anytime. That's not what it says at all. But it's way different than what American pseudo Christians are using as their approach to remove women's rights. And it's like anytime American Christianity or American pseudo Christianity uses its illogical framework to leverage politics to remove rights from some group, for whatever reason, it gets compared to like China or Russia or Islam. And it's like, no, they've been doing this shit in America for hundreds of years. So please, let's stop comparing it to other places as if like America just started being fucking misogynist or if America just started being racist. Like, we couldn't have seen this shit coming. It's like, no, this has been hundreds of years. Women just got the right to vote in like the early 1900s. So let's not act like this country ever cared about women. Women still don't get paid equal on basically any job as men. Like someone in it was like there was a discussion in a work meeting and somebody was talking about like how other countries have to worry about censorship and like you know, if you're not living in a stable democracy, then you have to worry about all these things. I'm like, are people actually still referring to America as a stable democracy? Like, on what planet is what we are currently living in a stable democracy by any metric? And that's where I think it's the propaganda and the notion that America was ever a stable democracy is like laughable for various reasons. But the only way you can ever actually believe America was a stable democracy is if you accept Black people, Native Americans, and women don't deserve first-class citizenship, because none of those people, none of those groups, and let's not even get into like the gay, like LGBTQIA, as far as they're deserving of first-class citizenship and never actually attaining it. Because the only way you can believe America was a stable democracy is if you believe all those people ever had first-class citizenship at the same time, if ever, which is clearly not the case. None of those
I think
groups have had first-class citizenship at the same time.
I think we have to consider that that a stable democracy itself is kind of an oxymoron. That fundamentally democracy itself is an unstable continuum of ideas that are constantly being measured against each other until some kind of consensus is agreed upon within a narrow window of dialogue where consensus can actually be formed. And it's not a straight line. It's not a linear progression. It's all over the place. And so stability within that continuum can exist in the sense that yes, there's continual progress or regression towards some goal or away from some goal. You know, there's always give and take, a push and pull, and that isn't even a linear thing. It's always in separate directions because there's numerous interests that are all conflicted and they're all competing for attention. So it's not. It's only stable in the sense that there's still dialogue, or I guess it could be a stable system if there was no dialogue. But that'd be like the opposite of democracy. That would just be, I don't know, that would be dictatorship.
Well, and it's like, you know, it's fascism. It's you know, top-down dictatorship. It can be oligarchy. It can be plutocracy. But again, we don't have a stable democracy. So, I mean, in the sense of, like you're saying, it's a paradox, like to call a real democracy stable. We don't have either stability or an actual democracy.
Like so a functional democracy is the closest we could get to a stable democracy. And we don't really have a functional democracy right now.
No.
At all.
There's not been one period in this country's history where one minority group was not in some sort of prisoner of war camp.
Did the Greeks even get democracy right?
Yeah, of course they did. They fucking, yeah, of course. But in the sense of like, democracy was never for anybody but white men, bro.
Yeah.
Let's not act like democracy was for like all the people. That's why we can't fucking use that bullshit as like our system. It was never for the rest of us. It was only for white men ever. Ever. So I think it's like really, it's really like, what's the word? White supremacy wins when like non-white people rush to democracy as their only fucking solution, because as if like that's the only system that could ever like allow people to coexist peacefully or using resources rationally. And I think it's the notion that we need some sort of like hierarchical management, and that like is 100% coming from this notion of like white men needing to
wear a suit,
control. And even, you know, obviously like in Greek times the notion of like white and black wasn't the same as it is now, or if even like it wasn't race based so much as like tribe based, but they still thought of like male like douchebag supremacy, basically. Like if you were the biggest douchebag with the biggest fucking like penchant for violence and capacity to execute that violence, you're the one that led. And that's like at that time, that specific type of culture coexisted with other cultures, which were like, yeah, we'll have voting, and we'll have a Senate, and we'll have everybody can do 2 years in the Senate, but we still have fucking slaves. So like, let's not pretend that they got everything right either. And I think that's the problem with like American culture romanticizing Greek and Roman infrastructure or Greek and Roman architecture or Greek and Roman politics, is because they always make it seem like they got that shit perfect and leave out the negative aspects of those cultures too.
Yeah.
Because again, it's like, yeah, Athenians had slaves. Fuck it, you know, their Athenian democracy for men. Women, I think women could be in the Senate, if I'm not mistaken, but they are still second-class citizens, and it's like,
I bet they could only be heard by the Senate.
No, I think when you were served in the Senate, it was like, I think everyone had to serve in the Senate if they were a citizen, but there was a class of citizens that were slaves and second class that couldn't serve, and it was not necessarily gender oriented, but it would be like a lot more often than not the women would be put into that class. So it's like it's like the way it played out, the women could be in the Senate, but due one reason or another, they'd end up in the second class, but the second class wasn't only women.
Yeah.
So that's why it's like, it's not black and white. It's not completely patriarchal, and it's not like completely misogynistic, but it's definitely not even remotely close to perfect, because they had all kinds of problem in Athens. But the Athens is what people generally point at as being like the paragon of democracy, as if, you know, because they were like some of the original creators of democracy, that they were like infallible. Like, no, Athens had a bunch of fucked up shit about it. Yeah, Athens was like really fucked up.
They were so free that they could walk around wearing just like, you know, a sheet wrapped around their waist, or, you know, basically a bed sheet. They didn't even have to wear clothes. They had such freedom. That's how good they had it.
That's some of the tamer stuff, you know. That's like more tame than it should be, in the sense of like, if that was as bad as it get, okay, but no, Athens had a lot of problems. And again, I think we see in especially Western white supremacist cultures, Athens trying to be like whitewashed as if it was like this really awesome, high-minded really academic place, as if this whole other shit wasn't happening. So I'm not about to like let the Athens propaganda like get them off for all of the horrible shit that happened in Athens, as if like yeah, you could say it was a functional democracy if you excluded all the second class citizens in Athens. And it's the same shit that they're doing here, which is why I keep getting mad at people who accept that there's ever been this notion of any sort of functional democracy, because there's never been a place that's called itself democratic that didn't have an explicit second class of citizens that did not have participation in that democratic system. So that's where I'm like, whether we call them prisoners, whether we call them slaves, whether we call them untouchables, whatever the fuck, there's always those people in society that society depends upon to clean the fucking sewers, to do the work for free. So some asshole can say his family built their generational wealth off of hard work, but not say whose hard work it was. And that's what I get fucking sick of when they try to make it seem like this shit was ever functional, because none of this wealth was ever accrued from anything mutually beneficial. Wealth does not accrue from mutually beneficial actions. Sorry, capitalists. Sorry, people who believe in free market. You can fuck off, because I know math. That's not how it works.
So in North Korea, the Democratic Republic of North Korea, voting is mandatory and turnout is habitually 100%. Like everyone votes, even people in prison vote.
Yeah,
they don't have a choice for who they vote for, but they vote.
In Iraq, under Saddam, it's like you see that, like, because obviously it's like a manipulation, but at the same time, people actually cast those votes because they're scared. It's not like they have to fake them. Even it's this issue of like the way the West makes it seem is as if somebody's like filling out a bunch of fake votes. It's like, no, people are afraid if they vote against this person, so they don't have to fake the things. It's like a real, the projection, because the same shit happens in America. It's like, oh, nobody will vote for anybody but the status quo candidate during the primaries, because they make it seem like, oh, if you vote for anybody but who we say is the main candidate in the primary, then you're basically giving the other party a win by not unifying the party. And it's like that same sheepish bullshit happens on the left and the right, when I'm like, it's insane how much people who were pushing for Bernie Sanders got like ostracized, and then you find out the whole Democratic National Committee was like actually colluding against him. And there's all these things about not having transparent or equal and fair opportunities for people to participate at the government level, where it's like we know we don't have a functional democracy, even if there's such thing ever exists. It's just we have no choice but to keep going with it. So when we're ever like pointing at other countries as if like the Ugandans somehow have it worse off because Museveni wins every election, it's like, it's not really any different. They just have a clear understanding that they don't have a choice. Our choice just gives us the semblance that we are actually influencing the outcome in a way that then it allows the delusion to persist, and then allows people to be like, well, at least we're not Saudi Arabia when they have fucking monarchs and shit. And it's like, well, we have oligarchs, we have plutocrats, we have the same shit here. You just can't admit it to yourself. And that's like ultimately seeing those people unable to admit that America is the same thing while they keep projecting it onto other places is like this weird Twilight Zone episode where I'm like, you guys know you're like the Spider-Man meme thing, right? And it's like it's as if they just don't understand the irony of them trying to like call another kettle black while this shit is like deteriorating so quickly. It's like, what is the use of even trying to point, especially incorrectly, when we're incorrectly trying to compare loss of rights? If they were going to say any other thing but abortion and point at Islam, it wouldn't be as egregious. But when then the like specific thing they're pointing out isn't even really outlawed in those other countries the same manner or reason, it's like, oh, this is just fucking racist. They're just being racist when you say, oh, what is this Saudi Arabia? Well, actually, when you break it down, this is not like Muslim countries, hardly at all. So I'm not surprised, but I'm just like really disappointed to see as many Democrats openly racist, not realizing how racist they're being. And it's like, this is a deeply unserious country, because this is also the same country that's having women lose their rights and also like still act as if Will Smith slapping Chris Rock is like really important. I just don't understand. Like, it feels like there's low doses of LSD in something. I'm not sure what it's in. I don't think it's the water supply. I don't think it's like, maybe it's some sort of meat product. I don't know what the fuck it is, but it just feels like a lot of Americans are getting low dosed of LSD. Not a whole lot, not enough to have them see sound or like experience a religious experience that's actual religious experience, but it's just enough to make them susceptible to the constructed fake religious experiences that they are being manipulated into doing insane shit and taking insane positions constantly. And that's where I'm. It's like the most logical thing I can come to, because it's like there's no real common denominator among the American psychosis. It's so broad and it's so varied that I'm like, I can only logically conclude that there's a low dose of LSD in something that Americans are consuming en masse. Or, I mean, not necessarily LSD, but some LSD type hallucinogen or some sort of mind-altering substance that makes people fucking weird. Because America is just like, it's like a bullet-riddled fever dream at this point. I don't even know how to describe it. It's so weird. It's so like the day-to-day American existence. Like, oh, mass shooting, fucking Will Smith slapped Chris Rock and everybody's mad. Wait, what? And it's like the way things are like thrown at people as if these events somehow link together, and like the way news presents experience as if me sitting in my home, in my abode, should somehow be influenced by this thing that they're telling me, like, hey, look at this news, this is affecting you sitting right home. Wow, is it? Because right now I'm chilling, and then it's like, oh, there are all these things. Like, when it comes to rights, when you don't need a right in the heat of the moment, losing it may not feel like a big deal until you actually need to use it, which is where it's like, I'm not talking about losing rights. I'm talking about just things occurring. And then further, it's like, I'm so tired of the news making it seem as if I have equal capacity to influence global warming as like Taylor Swift and all of her jets. Like, oh, she sold one of them. She sold one of her jets, and most of her flights aren't her. It's like, well, I don't have a fucking jet. So in this world where you have individuals using private jets for extremely short abusive flights and the media not being responsible enough to make it clear that the onus of responsibility for solving global warming isn't on people who are like walking to the grocery store, but it's on people who are like using private jets to take very short flights, or the oil companies who perpetuate these practices. It's really like, I don't know if objective news ever existed, but we're at a clear point where organizations and corporations have purchased the narrative in such a way that individuals consuming the narrative are meant to bear the burden of all of the things that capitalism is abusing and destroying the planet with. And I'm like, I see it. I don't know. I just don't know how many other people see it. Like, how many other people internalize the notion that they are responsible for the things that these oil companies are not taking responsibility for, and then turn around and try to stand on the corner and fucking change everybody driving by? It's like, it's as if there's an attempt to induce a neuroses for people to carry the burden of all of the destruction that they perpetuate, while also paralyzing them from doing anything about the destruction that's happening around them. And I feel that it attempted imposing that neurosis constantly, and I'm constantly pushing it off. But I just wonder how many other people are unable to like avoid the neurosis because they're constantly inundated with things that make them either feel like they should be scared or that they should be responsible for all of the problems that are happening that they're being told about that they had nothing to fucking do with.
How many jets does she have?
How many what?
How many jets does she have?
Just one now. She's down to one. She had 2 jets.
Like,
she had 2.
Like Lear jets or bigger?
I think they were like, I want to say they're probably like G5s or something. I don't know off the top of my head. But understanding the way that these people travel, it was probably like a G4 or G5. So like maybe a G, I don't know. Like who knows what specific, you could probably look it up. It's more so her PR team's response to the whole like social media acknowledgement of her being a contributor was like, well, she sold one of them and she like rents it out and isn't using the plane all the time. And it's like, dude, obviously other people do this shit, but when put on the spot as someone who is the offending party, it's the absolute worst response of putting off blame and not accepting responsibility, where it's like, dude, you can now sell the one you have left as a gesture to say, you know what, I was wrong. I realize traveling by private jet and owning a private jet is sending the wrong message, and it's just a horrible way to travel because it's horribly carbon negative and it destroys the environment. So I'm not going to do that anymore. My bad. No, we're not the ones using the jet most of the time. What? It's such a disconnected response. That also I don't.
Wait, I own this thing, but because I don't use it all the time, it's not my fault. That doesn't fly.
Right, as if the destruction on the planet doesn't matter. And that's where I sincerely think that there are a bunch of Americans out there that don't believe that the planet, like the habitat, is actually impacted by humans at scale. Unless it's China. Unless China's doing the polluting, then they'll believe it if it's Chinese pollution.
Yeah, because Chinese pollution is like 10 times worse than American pollution, right? I mean, at least 10 times worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows what those Chinese people are putting in their pollution?
Fuck, I mean, Russian pollution is at least 10 times worse than American pollution, too.
Let's not get into that commie pollution. So, I mean, what's the name? Herschel Walker literally said something like, China is using up America's clean air. And I'm...
Wait, the football guy?
Yeah, that's running for some office. He literally said that. I wish I was making that up. He said China was going to take America's clean air.
You know, China planted more trees last year than like every other country in the world.
I know. It's like
not just little tiny saplings that look good, but like entire forests. They reforested portions of the Gobi Desert like on scale that is like unimaginable.
So my thing is like, I'm not about to be like, oh, trying to solve the pollution problem.
No. They still have
they're very far from that. The issue is they realized how bad their pollution had become, so they've started to move in the other direction. Whereas our government seems to like just be catering to these Luddites who still don't want to believe in an actual like in ecosystem. They don't believe in ecosystem in a way that then perpetuates these individually destructive and societally even more destructive behaviors, such as like everyone driving a combustible engine, like a combustion engine based vehicle, and then driving them into the ground and not getting them serviced and having them leak fluids everywhere. So it's like, it wouldn't be bad enough if people weren't just putting it into the air. No, these vehicles leak all kinds of fluids everywhere, so it's going into the ground as well. And then they won't dispose of things properly, or they'll burn their fucking trash. And it's like, all of the behaviors that Americans were allowed to do and taught within the 60s and 70s that they haven't stopped, based on the reduce, reuse, recycle movement of the 80s, early 90s, is like, it's the same people, it's the same ones who didn't change their behaviors in the 80s are still around, making it dirtier for everybody else because they fucking go to the public parks and throw their trash on the fucking ground because they can't just walk to the trash crane, the trash bin that have been conveniently placed at any public area, because they're just too fucking lazy and they don't care that everyone else has a nice place to visit. So these people who just don't, they're the same ones who don't wear masks. They don't have any concern for anyone else having a good experience and don't actually care about having a really good experience themselves. They just basically exist shithole to shithole and don't care if everyone else has to deal with cleaning up their shit. And that's where I'm like, the Americans who And I see it. I see it now. The ROTC to fucking military to vet pipeline is for. It's designed for people that are willing to go shit in other people's backyards, come home and then get a check and act like they didn't go shit in other people's backyard. And other people get caught up in that in the process. Because then I'm seeing like the first person shooter to ROTC pipeline and how much like video games, well, specifically first person shooters have been tied into like military recruitment. And that's where like now you even see people in the military referring to Air Force as chair force because they're so remote and everything is so virtual concerning like yeah bro that's how they're calling them chair force now because they're all like fucking drone pilots and shit. They're not like actual pilots. They're fucking remote drone. They're fucking chair force now. They're a joke. So you see that the video games have catered to try to like guide people into chair force and then dehumanizing the people on the other end of their fucking drone strikes so that these kids grow up playing these fucking first person shooters and then get into chair force and feel like they actually fucking did something. So it's like,
you know, not gonna lie, I enjoy Ace Combat, and unfortunately,
it's fun. No,
Eve Valkyrie is gonna go away here in like 2 weeks. They're turning off the server for Eve Valkyrie, and that's kind of sad because that game's also really fun. And
it is fun, but there are people out there who had too much fun and are like, oh, the military will take me and allow me to do this and get real kills. And because I don't actually think of brown people as real people, I'll think of those as like badges. And like, I'll think in my head, ultra kill when I'm like taking out fucking blocks of people instead of actually thinking about the humans on the other side of that image. So I see what they're doing with dehumanizing people and then dehumanizing the kill process, which is also where like those weapons of war were being outlawed because of the whole like decoupling of understanding like what you're doing on a screen actually results in people dying, especially when they're calling dead humans who weren't the targets fucking collateral damage. It becomes even more dehumanizing of a process, and these people are like killing like they're executing people who were not even the targets.
They're just going for collateral damage.
They don't understand the actual implication of human life because these people are no longer human to them. They're just collateral damage on the other side of the screen. And I see it now, which is where again I'm at the point where I'd be perfectly fine with video games just getting banned altogether. I don't care. It's like the way that they've been used. I don't fucking care anymore. Like I love video games, but they are now a tool of destruction just by proxy of like 1 or 2% of the people being funneled from them into the positions of the chair force. You fucking ruined the whole 100% now. I don't care. Take it away. It doesn't matter to me. It's more so like the inability for American culture not to devolve into like murder over things is why we can't have nice things. But also that's why I think there must be like LSD in the water somewhere because it's like everything devolves into fucking murder. It's
if the games should be enough. Like Microsoft Flight Simulator is challenging and very rewarding as far as flying games go. And there are quite a few flying games, flight simulators that don't involve combat aircraft at all. There's no evading a missile at any point. All you got to do is land, and that's actually the hard part. Getting in the air is the easiest part. Landing, holy shit. Like some of the games are so challenging that you spend the first day, 2, 3 week just getting really frustrated until that first time you land. It's like, holy crap, I can do it. And you do it again and again, and then all of a sudden the game becomes 10 times bigger. But those kind of experiences don't happen with like forced combat campaign. Even campaign modes don't allow you to have that kind of like connection to flight in flying games. And so, as much fun as Ace Combat is, or Valkyrie, or DCS Worldwide, or whatever, like none of them really give you that intimacy with flight. But it takes too long to get really good at flying a wide variety of those planes, and to really get into it, you got to spend buku dollars on interfaces and little boxes that give you telemetry and a whole bunch of them, so you can have all the telemetry on it, like at your fingertips, without having to scan through menus. It's expensive. It's like way more expensive than having a car simulator, or just the most basic arcade flight stick interface. It doesn't compare to a fully realized flight simulator interface, like a cockpit, a simulated cockpit. And so
many buttons, that you actually have to use,
knobs, sliders, dials. Like, they all mean something, and you could do it from a keyboard if you really want to become a keyboard wizard, but it's so much better when you do the whole simulator. And so I get it. Like, that kind of gaming experience is really expensive, and you got to really invest a lot of time. It's a commitment. And so being able to grab an Xbox or PlayStation controller and go whip through any of the first-person or third-person shooters that just, like you said, reduce people to statistics, that's great. All you got to do is have a $15 to $20 controller, maybe a $30 controller if you want to spend a little bit more money. Or I'm sure people are out there spending huge amounts on just a regular controller, because I know that people are spending huge amounts on custom arcade style interfaces with custom selected buttons, because you like the cherry better than the brown. Or you like one manufacturer's brain versus a different brain because of the way that you can dial in latency, things like that. I know that there's a whole world of really fine-tuned computer interface for gaming, but I'm just thinking in terms of what's available off the shelf. It's really easy to jump from Call of Duty to Modern Warfare or whatever to what is that? There are a bunch of games now, like Far Cry or whatever. That Fortnite.
Dude,
there's so many.
Far Cry 6.
Not recently.
So that's the one thing I was about to talk about next, actually. So when I played it, I went back and looked, and my kill count was like over 2,000.
What?
So what I'm getting at is, like, in the course of doing a campaign, I killed like 2,000 people. And most of them were with a bow and arrow. So I'm like, that's if I'm a young impressionable kid who doesn't realize, like, this is video game violence, in the sense of it's really fairly realistic in the way that they portray it, and it's like, I don't think kids should be playing Far Cry 6 anyway. But a lot of parents don't know the difference. So these kids are playing this game and they kill over 2,000 people. Just in the story, if they go online, 10,000, 15,000, whatever. Whoa. But that's like, I think I played 36 hours of gameplay, 2,000 people.
That's not a lot.
That's
that's not a long time.
It's a lot of people dead and not a lot of time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's not a lot of time to put into a game to get to 2,000.
Which, again,
you're not destroying a starship with 500 people on it.
No, and this is, like I said, most of it was like bow and arrow. At some points, I was using the grenade bow and arrow, but those became. It was like I felt like the gun was too easy. You know what I mean? In those types of games, so that's where, in general, I'll use a bow and arrow or something just because it's like the gun. Like I said, it's just.
The best version of Halo is grenades and melee.
Yeah, and the energy sword.
Yeah, just like the hand-to-hand combat version of Halo is, if you can get through, especially like the first version, there was only one stage where you needed an assault rifle, and that was the library, where they just kind of flood you and nonstop. It's just a wave after wave and go to the next room and wave after wave. But the rest of the game you can get through with melee and grenades, or melee and pistol, or melee and the energy sword in later iterations of the game. And you can do this all the way up through the entire game, and it's the most fun version because you actually have to be with it on the controller. You can't just kind of slop your way through and spray and pray and go pick up some more rounds and spray and pray some more and respawn and that kind of thing. You got to pay attention because some of your adversaries are big and they carry hammers.
Yeah.
There was a game years ago. Oh God, I think it was called Splinter Cell. It was basically a creeping around ninja game.
Tom Clancy.
Yeah. And it was the kind of game that rewarded you for not being seen. Like, if you were willing to wait and like hide for 5 minutes until that person went on their when they were walking around the perimeter and, you know, doing their checks or whatever, like walked out of view, that was like better than engaging them and then having to hide the body. Like, if you could get through the whole level without being seen and accomplish your mission without being seen at all, even if it took you, like, you know, 45 minutes, when you could just like run through it and do it in, like, you know, 5 minutes. If you did it in 45 minutes, you would actually be rewarded more for that kind of deliberacy.
Well, and that's one of the games that gave you the option to do stealth or first-person shooter style. Yeah. Like Hitman's one of those, whereas Metal Gear series were generally more like stealth, and if you tried to do the first person shooter, you're just going to get lit up because they would give you like a fucking dart gun or some shit to start off with, and it's like, you know, you got to go up against people with AK-47s and you have a fucking dart gun that's just going to knock them out, and then they wake up if you wait too long.
Yeah, but you picked up a mechanical pencil in one of those rooms, you know. There was another series that allowed you to go stealth. It was the Deus Ex series, and that was one of those games where you could do bio mods. You can modify your body until you become a cyborg eventually. And there was an aspect where you could go run and gun, and usually, like you said, you know, usually die, and you're rewarded for being stealthy and for using technology and being crafty at solving these puzzles. Like, how do you get into this room and get through the room without being seen? Because you don't want to kill anybody, because that causes more problems later on. Like, these are games like that have depth. Maybe they're just too complex. They're not like it's not as easy for a group of people to interact in that kind of game environment. So it's harder to get people to talk shit and offer to sell couches.
Well, and I like that some games give you the option not to kill people, and not, you know, you don't have to like actually go through with murdering people to win the level or whatever, and then that'll give you a whole different outcome if you go through and like don't execute people. Because like, I'm even playing Soul Calibur 6 right now, and they'll give you the option to kill people at the end of the fight sometimes, and it's like, you don't always have to kill people in this game, even though you just fought them. And I think that's funny that like even a fighting game doesn't force you to actually kill people, but they'll give you the option. Well, I'm sure a ton of people take it.
Mortal Kombat encouraged fatalities, because if you could unleash the fatality at the end, you got the cool combo video, but you didn't have to kill people.
Right.
You never had to kill anybody in that game, but people wanted to because the fatalities were pretty cool looking. Because you got to see the special animation and the special video sequence.
And I guess that game Sifu that just came out gives you the option not to like execute people at the end, and it gives you a different outcome if you don't.
See, that's cool. That's really cool.
Well, and then I don't know if you ever played what's it called? Fallout, like Beyond, like once it started going 3D.
I remember seeing Fallout and only seeing like building shelters.
It may have been New Vegas, but I think I think it was Fallout 3. In one of them, you can like, they give you an option to either start freeing slaves or start becoming a slaver. And I'm like, man, that's fucked up because I'm sure a lot of people chose the latter. Whereas, like, once you start going on the like
You can't
slave
turn back
freeing
from that.
missions,
There's no
you
turning
can,
back. Okay, is there?
you can. I mean, they give you an option, but that's where it's like, um, there's shit where they draw the line, like they won't let you kill kids or shit like that. Like, um, they'll give you some sort of moral line, but then they'll even have a line where they draw it. If it's like, no, we're not going to allow you to do that shit in our game. Like,
So it's only
but then,
partially morally ambiguous.
but it's not, because if you try, then you get like forever marked, and then everybody hates you from that point on.
Oh.
And you can't get any friend. And it like, that's the thing. It like fucks up the gameplay, because if you go around trying to kill kids, then like, of course nobody wants to be like friends with that person. So it basically like locks you out of winning the game on that round.
Wow.
And it's like, you can't, if you try to kill a kid, you can't win the game from that point on. Basically.
That's a really good punishment. That's a fantastic,
it is
fantastic in-game
because
punishment.
what's funny about it is like the way that they like give you options, but it's like, oh, every option doesn't go without complete, like without some sort of punishment like that. Where again, the only reason I even know about it is there was like a discussion. There was like a discussion at some university about violence in games, and Fallout came up, and how like you had the option to kill kids, and I had to like point out to them like, no, actually, if you do that, it like fucks up your game completely, and the person didn't know that, and it like gave them a different perspective of what the options were actually trying to do concerning, like, if they give you a moral choice, is not the developers are not always being gray about it. They are sometimes trying to make a moral point by giving you that choice. But if you don't go through it, it may appear as if it's just gray and everything. They're like, oh, anything goes because it's virtual. It's like, no, that's not actually the case. Yeah, because then there's other things like you get the option to nuke a city. And if you do it, then everybody from that point on that like knows about it hates you.
Yeah.
It's like Megaton City or some shit. I think that's the name of it. But it's because that's what it was. the people, yeah, this is the funny thing. The people in the tower, there's like this big fortress tower, try to convince you to nuke this city because they want to expand the tower. So if you nuke the city, everybody hates you except the people in the tower. So you have like a landscape, you have an entire landscape of people who hate you except the people in the tower, basically. So there's all these little moral quandaries that they put you in to then see like, oh, if you're gonna test, you can't, because they give you the choice. The people who are just like, oh, I'll see what happens if I do this. Like, no, you can't just do that, even though it's virtual. The implication will be permanent on your character, and people will hate you forever. Like, if you do something, there's nothing you can undo.
You got to start over completely, create a whole new game account.
Yes.
Oh no! No! Oh. Oh, that's even worse, because then you have to start all over at the beginning. You got to start a new email account. You have to create a whole new online.
Well, I mean, if it's an online game, I mean, some games are like that anyway. Like Warcraft, like if your character dies, you just have to start an entirely new character, and you lose all the shit that was associated with your previous character, which is why people get so obsessive about that shit. And then they try not to like die permanently on a campaign or
Well,
something. Because
I
then
think with
if you die,
Warcraft,
people loot your body.
I think with World of Warcraft, like if you died anywhere, your stuff was gonna be there for a little while. But if somebody came along and found it,
Right, but people loot it.
yeah, they could loot your
Yeah.
shit. So you had like this like really short amount of time to get right back to where you were
Hmm.
and get your stuff
Yeah.
back. But
Like theoretically, you get your shit back, but most people like lose it in generally lose it in situations where somebody else is going to loot it before they have a chance.
yeah,
And that's ultimately like why people are so obsessed with like preserving their accounts.
yeah. That's why I play freemium games where they don't really do that stuff to you. I mean, like Eve, they charged you, and then they if you your ship blew up because you got greedy or ambitious, then you lost your ship and everything that was on it. But you still had all the skills necessary to get that ship back eventually. It's a matter of commitment. But then there's Star Trek Online where you just respawn. They just give you everything right back, and you just go back to blowing up more stuff in space. There's a space assassin. So Star Trek Online reduces a Starfleet captain or Starfleet admiral to a space wizard or a space assassin. There's very little diplomacy involved. It's kind of sad. And so far I've been playing. I enjoy it still because the storyline that they've been crafting is like, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. The storyline's all right. It's still very much in line with Star Trek, but all of the maintenance play, to get the free ship, that stuff's basically space enforcer, assassin, space wizard stuff. By space wizard, I mean, scanning an anomaly and potentially protecting a single planet of Federation members.
Every time I look at the gameplay videos on Star Trek Online, I just like get averted from downloading it because I look at the images, the still images look amazing, and then the gameplay, I get so bored from the repetition from a video of it. I'm like, oh god, could not do
Yeah,
this.
it's mostly you hold down like the A or the D and engage your impulse engines, and then slowly activate, your skills, which could be some kind of phaser or some kind of special weapon or some kind of other thing, energy drain. And so I play it because if I found that if I press a certain sequence of skills, the screen lights up in a certain way. And so I see a chain of explosions, and that's kind of cool. But after I get through the new storyline that they give out once a month, it's kind of like, okay, I got to play this 14 more times so I can get the free ship at the end of the year. Bastards.
Oh, that's
It's okay though, because it's like the light shows keep improving. They keep giving me new stuff that makes the screen light up in different ways. And occasionally, when multiple starships use the same kind of ability, it stacks, and so there's a crazy cosmic event that occurs. Like it might initiate some kind of vortex. So that's kind of cool. But otherwise, it's just reducing Starfleet captains to assassins and space wizards. And that kind of sucks. Like Picard would be totally ashamed of this version of Star Trek. He's also, unsurprisingly, not present at all in any of the episodes. Like, you never see Picard. It's everyone else who has, like, a smaller sideline story within the greater Star Trek universe. No Jean-Luc anywhere. Even Q appears, but no Jean-Luc. So that tells me if Jean-Luc's not present, that's the reason that this Star Trek universe exists the way it does.
It's so wild. I don't know what happened with Discovery, but I just could not keep watching any of the new Star Trek stuff.
Discovery sucks. I'm not gonna even pretend anymore. It just sucks. I did enjoy Strange New Worlds though.
I keep hearing Strange New Worlds is like good, but for I don't know. I guess like I think I'm fine with the old stuff, and I
Yeah.
don't necessarily know if I need anything new. So I have not felt any sort of inclination to start any of the new stuff after I watched season 1 of Picard. I was like, okay, this is good. This is
Season
enough.
2 of Picard was like a dragon. Oh, it was so bad.
Oh no.
Yeah,
I haven't watched one episode of
don't
it.
even go there. It's like the most disappointing. Like it's like they took an episode of Voyager and tried to stretch it out into an entire series or a season of Picard. Like, and it involves time travel, so you probably can guess the rest. But they tried to.
Yeah.
It's bad. It's really bad. It was so sad too. They had a second opportunity to kick some ass, and nope. CGI was good though, so at least that.
I feel like too much stuff is just trying to like capture nostalgia and then reinvent the nostalgia, and it's all failing at it. Which is like, I see why you would try to do that, but you'd think that they would stop at some point, which is where I'm like, we just need new stories. We need new actors. We need new faces. We have to like let go of our childhood attachments in order for things to stay fresh. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time doing that.
It just occurred to me.
It's not easy, obviously.
It just occurred to me they took an entire second season of Picard to do a amalgam of story arcs from Voyager, and it occurs to me now that Picard didn't do better than Janeway. Like, I mean, they solved the problem at the end of the season of Picard, obviously, because it's Picard and he has to, but they didn't. He didn't do a better job solving the problem than Janeway did. Okay, so maybe it wasn't bad. Maybe it was actually good in the grand scheme.
But I mean, I guess like
I'm bending over real hard for that one. I'm bending backwards real hard.
Yeah.
No,
yeah,
there's only so much.
Discovery did the Voyager thing kind of too.
Yeah.
Ish.
Maybe there's really only like 45 different Star Trek narratives, and of those 45 actual Star Trek narratives, there's only like 5 variations. And once they've gone through all of it, I mean, really, that's probably only enough for 1.5 7-season Star Trek arcs. So, I mean, we're well into repetition at this point. And that's being really generous, saying there's 45 different Star Trek stories.
Which, at some point, I guess, like, people need to let the next generation have the thing. But I don't know if this next generation is like consuming this thing, and it feels like they're trying to sell this or like give this to the previous generation's nostalgia, but just doing it horribly wrong. Which I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see a ton of like love for the new Star Trek stuff in the same way. Like nobody's like doing I guess COVID too, but
I don't think that Discovery was made for us. I think it was made for a new generation of Star Trek fans. I think that Strange New Worlds is made for us. It's made for people who are aware of Captain Pike before Discovery. Like it's for people who are aware that Pike was the original captain. Before, like, they made Scott Bakula the captain of Enterprise. Like in the pilot, it was Captain Pike,
Right.
and
Yeah,
Spock
and
was
very
there.
original.
Yeah, and so like if you're aware of that version of Star Trek, then this version, the Strange New Worlds, is actually very interesting because it's not Discovery. it's about the Enterprise. It's Star Trek.
But even Discovery referenced that episode, so
That's
like
true.
It's not like they were unaware of it. But Discovery pulled like clips directly from that episode.
Yeah, I think that they had to do that in a way to establish like that they are part of that timeline and that canon. But Discovery
to bring Pike back,
yeah, but Discovery starts jumping the shark real hard, like right off the bat, and the whole show is about shark jumping.
Yeah,
and it's all it's the opposite of there's no measure of self-control in Discovery. Everything's urgent, everything's falling apart, and that's like not what Star Trek's about. People are organized in Starfleet. That's how they got to be there. Like the idea that 1,000 years in the future the Federation is collapsing because of mismanagement's like one of those things where it's like, oh wait, so they slipped back on the Kardashev scale? Really? Wow. Oh man, it only took 1,000 years too? Shit, seriously? I thought they'd take like 10,000 years.
Right, like Foundation.
Yeah.
Which is where, I feel like Foundation is telling the story that Star Trek thought it was telling. Or maybe we're just along the way, we're midway along in Foundation's story. And that's what they were trying to do the whole time. But it doesn't feel intentional, which is why I think people like myself ended up like disconnecting from it. And like, it's not even that I was searching for new sci-fi source material. Even it's just the way that they are treating their narratives. They're doing the same thing over and over. It is all Voyager. Oh, we'll just do Voyager in space or in space time, and then Voyager in specifically time, and then Voyager like
in memory time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so Voyager in the other Earth, or in what is it? The Terrigen, or what? I forget what they call them. But whatever the like the opposite or the opposite universe
the
is.
Terran universe. Yeah.
Terran, yeah, not Terrigen. Terrigen's
the Terran universe with the Emperor.
Yeah. Do Voyager with the Terrans.
When you're out of ideas, just inject a Terran character, and all of a sudden, all story arcs are reopened.
Yeah,
like it's that's their Deus Ex Machina at work. Whenever they run into a serious writer's block, like oh crap, what do we do now, guys? We kind of wrote ourselves into this corner. Oh, just flip a switch. We'll add some Terrans. It'll totally confuse everybody. And then they totally just jumped the shark and made an entire season about Terrans. Lorca is a Terran.
Yeah. Man. And that's kind of, I feel like the same shit happened with the Star Wars stuff. And it's really funny because then the people that like complained about moving away from the Skywalker family are the same ones that like complained about the Obi-Wan shit. So you really just can't please anybody.
I enjoyed Obi-Wan. I really did. I thought it was fine. It was Ewan McGregor looks old enough to be a pre-New Hope Alec Guinness. Obi-Wan, it's kind of like the age, his age appropriate for the role, and he looks like he hasn't been keeping up with his practices, so he's kind of slow and he's not as sharp as he used to be. I was cool with all that. The Supreme Space Wizard action in the final fight. That was probably the most epic lightsaber battle that I've ever seen. But that Supreme Space Wizard power that he tapped into, that was too much. Obi-Wan shouldn't be able to unleash that kind of power after having like not been in practice for decade or whatever. I'm not buying it. It's cool though. What I mean is Vader, who has been like relentlessly pursuing Obi-Wan for a decade now, is absolutely pissed off with full Sith power. Should have handily defeated Obi-Wan. And then they screwed up the ending. They could have left room for more Obi-Wan stories. No, they kind of sealed it up. Nope, we don't get any more Obi-Wan, guys. Sorry. Fuck.
Yeah. Turns out closure is actually the thing you don't want to do. Everybody thinks they want closure. Reality.
Well, it's in a lot of ways, I think that Disney is just being smart and protecting the property and realizing, wait, if we overdo this, then we might miss out on future opportunities to make more money. Got to thaw them out in another 20 years when people forget and they want more.
Yeah. Man.
Hayden Christensen will definitely not be able to reprise his role as young Anakin. He'll look way too old. He looked way too old. He looked way too old in this one too, but they did a good job. At least they tried.
The de-aging tech is getting really insane though.
It's impressive. They did a really good job, but you could tell by the way he moves, he's not a spry young man anymore. He's getting older.
Yeah.
I think the only one who looks like the same is Natalie Portman. She's not even in.
Her and Winona Ryder and Millie Bobby Brown need to do a movie together or some sort of TV show where they just play different versions of each other. It's really crazy how much like if you like look at images of them next to each other, it's like, oh, this is the same person at different time in their lives, like at different times in their lives.
Oh wait, no, they could do some kind of weird continuum time travel story where they're all have to interact with each other, and they argue, and their arguments reveal how personalities and perspectives change over time.
Right. Yeah.
It could be a really complex drama. We accept cryptocurrency for ideas, internet, just saying.
Well, it was like whenever I was watching Stranger Things season 4, the Thor ads started to run. I'm like, man, they really look alike. It's like kind of uncanny how much Natalie Portman and Winona Ryder fucking look alike. And then Millie Bobby Brown obviously just looks like both of them by proxy. So it's like, yeah, gonna find out they're all related actually.
Well, considering how weird Hollywood is, would it really be too far-fetched?
No. Well, that's just like apparently Joe Manganiello has like a black ancestor.
Okay.
And he thought he was like very white. Not Barry White, but very white. Turns out he's closer to Barry White. So, yeah, it's really funny because I guess like they have this TV show where people like learn about their genetic histories or whatever, and then if they get a call beforehand, it's usually because they've found some black in their background, and it's like, you might need to sit down for this.
Oh. Oh, that's sad.
Uh,
That's real bad. That's
but yeah, it's so funny to see that like notion of, well, because then the same thing with Johnny Depp is happening. Apparently, he had uh, one of his ancestors was like the first slave to vote or to file a lawsuit for freedom or something like that. Where it's like, then you start seeing people start playing the 130-second drop rule and shit, and it's like, okay, this is getting kind of weird.
Whoa. Wait. So that means he really is a pirate then.
Yeah,
Well,
but yeah, this it's just like funny to see American identity seemingly under perceived threat from the attack on whiteness. It's like really funny.
so I've been watching For All Mankind lately. I really enjoy it.
What is that?
It's an
Never heard
alternate
of it.
history of space exploration, starting with the birth of NASA on through the colonization of Mars so far. And in this narrative, the Russians get to the moon first, and there's all sorts of turmoil. There's a lot of drama to it, but it's still embedded in science fiction, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun seeing this aspect of an alternate history that's not what's the word, European imperialism with a wig. It's kind of cool to see space exploration as the alternate history, because some of it is set in contemporary America, well, at least in the 90s. And so things look familiar, like clothing and music sounds familiar. And there were a lot of things that they've done very well to create this story that seems like, oh wait, this almost seems like it could have happened like this. And there are just enough changes that it's not like Man in the High Tower, where it's like, oh, this is totally an alternate reality. This is like a blurring of some fact and embellishment of narrative. It's cool.
Looks like the writer also wrote on Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and also Voyager.
Well, that's also cool. Yeah, it's got none of the special effects are so over the top that they scream, "Look at me, I'm doing some crazy shit." They're doing a good job at keeping it, within the realm of like, this was what was possible in this era with some embellishment. Like, they definitely have technologies that don't exist. But that's kind of to be expected with science fiction. So one thing that I found very amusing, though, is they explore the physics of firing firearms on the moon,
Huh.
which I thought was really amusing. They had to have specially modified weapons so the recoil wouldn't launch them after they shot.
Oh yeah, I think that's based on like a real world,
Yeah,
like,
they know. NASA knows what happens when you fire a semi-automatic weapon in space. They know. But they cover it, and they talk about things like, painting things white so that when it's in the sun it doesn't heat up to 200 plus degrees and melt the gloves. And then, other things that can go wrong. And then there's even like a Russian incursion on the U.S. base. It's this is definitely the sci-fi part, but it's pretty interesting, and they do a good job. I recommend at least sitting through like the first season, because the first season is kind of where things start to get interesting, and afterwards it gets kind of weird. But I'm holding on with hope that the colonization of Mars isn't a shit show, and so far it's all right, but it's still good. I mean, it's still keeping me interested. It's like a variation on the space opera that is closer to reality than like Foundation or Dune. Of course, I could do with less of like the social turmoil. I wish it was more, NASA and Roscosmos and fictional private space agency. I wish it was more of that, but they do dive into the personal lives of the astronauts, which is, I don't really care about that, but I know that some people are really into that kind of thing, so I guess it's cool. And then other than that, I watched I think it's the last episode of Better Call Saul. Like, it was a very it was consistent with the kind of tone that show had, and they provided closure. Now we know what happens at the end of his story, to an extent. And I hope that they decide to never revive it again, because this last season was just kind of like pulling teeth. Like, they should have stopped at the last season and just said, "No, guys, we're sorry, we're not doing any more of this. It's done." But nope, they had to keep going. It's kind of, like, I'm glad that people aren't trying, or trying to force another season of Futurama, because that show was really funny. But at this point, I don't think they could do it again. It would just be like Simpsons, where it's just voices going through motions.
Yeah, when's the last time you watched a Simpsons episode?
Years at this point. I mean, the last time I looked at Hulu, it reminded me that I had some, like, I think like 100 and something episodes of Simpsons that I hadn't watched.
Well, it's wild to me because I'm like, I can't imagine how much longer they can keep it going. How much longer can The Simpsons keep going?
Well, aren't all the voices computer generated at this point?
Oh my God, I would doubt it. Right?
I'm pretty sure the entire show is just generated by AI. They just tell it what they want the characters to do and say, and it's like, oh, this is what it's going to look like. And they program a few camera angles that they've decided, like, this is a good scene transition from building to building, or they've got all this stuff in an indexed library that they can just code it, and then episodes pump out. I'd be really surprised if there was like a room of illustrators and shaders animating cells of The Simpsons. I'd be really surprised. That would be like, well, at first it'd be too expensive, but I'd just be really surprised if they were still doing something like that. Because I'm pretty sure that, like, I don't even think Miyazaki does it like that anymore.
Well, I'm realizing, like, after playing the Dragon Ball Z video games, it's like they can get higher resolution animation using models, because it's cheaper to create a model and then, like, create all the different variations and then let the rendering do the actual steps, because then they can get like 60 frames, where then they would only actually need 29, but the rendering fills in the extras, whereas like having to have twice as many cells would cost twice as much money if it was hand drawn.
Yeah, and then they just like engage cell shading and it flattens it, and then it looks like the cartoon.
No, it looks better, and that's what I mean. Like,
well, I know, but it's like, but they just have to flatten it, and all of a sudden it looks like.
Well, what I'm saying is, like,
that's so cool.
It gets like it sounds crazy, but the animations that they get doing the video game approach ends up looking better than the actual animations because they can get like twice as many frames and it makes it like smoother. So that's where if you look at like, and then especially like the Dragon Ball stuff, they would like the Dragon Ball Super TV show, they'd have to skimp and then some of the frames would get shitty like individual drawings. So the model between images changes because like, oh, this one sequence they had to rush it and this one frame looks really terrible, so you see it and it's like that just doesn't happen with the video game approach to animation. And that's where after watching like hours of Dragon Ball Z video game animation, it is demonstrably better than the actual cartoon animation. It's really insane. And that's where even the movies have some poor frames because a lot of times the movies are like they'll run close to budget and they can't add extra frames and it ends up cutting frames in places. So it's really, this is ultimately why the hand drawn animation is like not really sustainable in 2022. I think South Park specifically using Flash and being able to put out animations that quickly is what sort of put the industry in this corner. Because South Park could respond to like weekly or, I mean, not necessarily even daily, but the way that they could respond to things happening made it so that other animations had to be a lot more timely with their references.
Yeah.
Which is like, on the one hand, it's great for jokes, but on the other hand, like, oh my God, I struggle so much looking at American animation anymore. It's just painful to look at. It's so bad in almost every case. American animation is an eyesore. Whether it's like
most
the
American
design,
animation looks lazy. That's how I feel about it. That's like the cornerstone.
Lazy at best, intentionally ugly, and rushed at worst. Because that's where, like, half the time it's like, oh, you just gave him 3 fingers because you were fucking lazy. It wasn't even like, oh, these people only have 3 fingers. No, you were just lazy.
I think the peak of American animation was Gumby. I'm serious.
I mean, Boondocks.
Oh no, Boondocks is good, Boondocks. But that's borderline anime.
I mean, but that's why it's the best. That's why it's peak. Because they took the best stuff. They took the best parts of anime and included it with like the American like sensibilities of humor for like Americans. So that's where I'm like, I personally feel like Boondocks is peak American cartoons because it's anime style, not like, and I guess in the sense of something that's not anime style. I think what is it? The Masters of the Universe animations probably are the best because even the Ninja Turtles skimped on a lot of animation in the early days. But the Masters of the Universe stuff is probably the actual best. I guess it's Hanna-Barbera. Yeah, I think Hanna-Barbera probably
that was like the only Hanna-Barbera property that they actually took seriously, though, I think.
Like, I mean, yeah.
Everything else was the same. Like it was the same image of a mountain in the distance, like and a single cloud scrolling by over and over again.
Yeah, they skimped on a lot of other shit, and I think that's, kids are not very judicious about their content. So yeah, a kid's gonna accept something that's like 24 frames with 12 of them recycled, and not know the difference. So Um, even going back and looking at the X-Men cartoons, they were really bad.
Oh, they were terrible.
Nostalgia nostalgia, and that theme song has done a number on people's
Okay, well, that
misidentified
theme
like
song is
memory of that
awesome, no
TV.
matter what.
It is,
And
but
it
the
only got
TV
better when they
show
put a
does
real
not.
guitar on it. And when it was just a synthesizer, it was like, okay, this is kind of cool. But when they put a real guitar,
Right,
and then it
but the
sounded
TV
awesome.
show does not match the awesomeness of that
Oh,
song
completely.
and the way that it's identified in people's
Yeah,
heads in
that
the
song
sense that
deserves like something way better than what it got. Like that's messed up. But
oh
no,
man,
here's something you just reminded me.
Ooh.
X-Men that we grew up with in the 90s, like at best was a polished version of the same kind of animation style used in Gem and the holograms.
But it wasn't even polished.
But it
You got to
wasn't
go
even
back
polished.
and look.
I know, that's what I mean.
Go back.
But that's what I mean. It was like
It's like
at best they kind of smoothed out some of the transitions, but it was the same style of animation, same style of drawing, the same style of shading. The lines were all the same. It was just lazy.
Even down to Jubilee being basically like Gem.
Jubilee was 100% Gem with Asian face.
Yeah.
Like, man.
They took Gem and split her into Rogue and Jubilee basically for the animations.
But combined, they still couldn't have nearly as much fun as Gem did.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Everyone had fun in Gem. That was one of those weird shows that, except for like their great foil, I can't even remember the name of the band that they were always at odds with. Like, they were the only ones that didn't have fun, but they still got to play it in like all these venues. It didn't make any sense. That whole story doesn't make any sense to me either. And then they rebooted it as a movie, which made even less sense. And I thought, well, crap, clearly I don't remember anything about this story.
And there was an MC Hammer cartoon briefly, and also a Kid and Play cartoon briefly, where they were just trying to make anything into a fucking cartoon.
Oof.
But
If the
it's
MC
like
Hammer,
I think there was a RoboCop cartoon.
I'm pretty sure I remember watching the RoboCop cartoon. That was pretty bad too.
Yeah.
There's a whole era of really bad cartoons that we suffered through.
Yeah.
People don't want
1988 animated series. They were just making cartoons out of anything. Jesus Christ.
Well, they couldn't give us like a Judge Dredd cartoon. That would have been too much. Even as an anime Judge Dredd, I mean, that could only be made as like a heavy metal style cartoon. Like, maybe now it could be made as an anime. That would be a really good anime, actually.
Did you ever watch the Super Mario Brothers Super Show?
Oh yeah, with that fat Mario and that old Luigi.
Lou Albano.
Yeah, and they were like, it was like a live like interaction thing, and then they would jump inside the big pipe.
They had Bad Dudes.
Yeah.
And Narcs.
Oh man, that was a really good version of Mario.
Yeah.
Like the way that they hosted the show, because the actual cartoon wasn't long enough to, even with 2 episodes, it wasn't long to fill up the half-hour time slot. I really liked them. They were fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Way too old to be Mario and Luigi. Like, ain't no way either of those guys are eating mushrooms and chomping on stars and throwing fireballs at any Goombas. Way too old for that.
Yeah, because they had a Legend of Zelda episode, or like the mini shows on there.
Yeah.
It was like, Zelda.
That's when you realize that Zelda and Peach are like the same person.
Right, yeah. And Link is not Zelda.
Link is definitely not Zelda.
But also Zelda knows how to fight.
Yeah. I think in the world of Zelda,
But so did Princess Peach.
yeah, they all did. They all know how to whoop some ass. Yeah. That whole world is full of fighters. the whole the whole Nintendo universe is full of fighters, whether or not it's like
Yeah, fucking
explicit.
Samus being a woman.
Yeah, whether or not it's explicitly violent or not, like the whole there every character in Nintendo universe is very competitive.
Well, it was a big deal when they made Samus a woman.
Oh, and they revealed when
Um,
people took off the helmet finally, and they're like, wait
yeah,
a second, what? Because they never announced it. It
yeah,
had to be discovered. It was almost an Easter egg, but it was intended.
right, exactly. But that's again pretty early on where you see it, it's there, but it's not, it's not using that as the only thing, uh, as the draw to the game. It's like, no, we have a gameplay that's awesome, but we're also making the protagonist a woman, and we're going to reveal it to you. So we make you realize, like, you assumed it was a man. That was your fault.
Yeah. I mean, Metroid was really good no matter what. It doesn't matter either way. It's just kind of some icing that there's a portion of the game that can, reveal aspects about the player, like really deep, like fundamental, like in some cases flaws about the person playing the game. And that was Metroid back in the 80s. So it's not like it's a new thing that games reveal motivation or reveal things about the person behind the controller. So I think that, like, your Far Cry reference is quite brilliant in a sense. They reveal, like, hey, we can show people who they are, and they might not like it. And once they reveal who they are, if they reveal a certain quality, we're just going to let everyone know. And in the same sense, like, we all had to wait for Nintendo Power, of course, to find out what other people thought. But once it was widely known, it was pretty easy to tell, like, people who had some kind of negative opinion of Samus. It's like, wait a second, Samus is a badass. You can't say that.
Right. Well, and I think part of it, there's this notion of guys not accepting women protagonists in their games or something. And I'm sure, yeah, there's like some douchebags out there who probably can't, but it's like most of these protagonists are not real people. So if it's a woman that can do the same shit as like Jason Bourne, I don't care because neither one of them is real. So the
Yeah.
idea that like, oh, this person can do this and that, like, yeah, their gender doesn't actually matter because they're not a real person.
Yeah. The number of people on the internet who have expressed extreme levels of butthurt over some fictional character being more physically capable than they are in real life. And that's
Right. Well,
what
or
kind
it's like Eon Flux. Like, Eon Flux is like clearly a badass assassin that can basically do anything that any of these other fictional male characters can do. But like, for whatever reason, that movie just did not catch on. And if you go back and watch it, it's actually a pretty good fucking movie.
Yeah.
And the TV show obviously was great in what it did for the abstract, like
Sci-fi noir.
cartoons at the abstract sci-fi noir at the time. Because they did a lot of shit with like without dialogue, which was very very unique for the time.
Yeah, a lot of it
being
was
able
just
to,
deep breathing and the sounds of someone running.
yeah, I think the first few episodes had no dialogue, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
at all.
the original iteration of Aeon Flux had no dialogue. And it wasn't
Yeah.
until they created a second
Because it was on
series
liquid
that-
television.
Yeah, and it was the second time around when they created an actual series to explain that whole universe. That's when dialogue emerges. And then, of course, with the movie, they couldn't make a silent film. That would have been
Well-
super ambitious at the time.
And it was funny too, because like even within the first iteration, when they added dialogue, like the male, I forget the guy's name, but the politician dude, he was always like this physically incapable, but mentally like not malicious or nefarious, but that was always where we were like, oh, clearly he's like using politics because people like Eon Flux are like too physically capable for this people like this guy. to even remotely think about it. So he enlists her as like his protection. So
Trevor
taking Eon
Goodchild.
Flux, yeah. But they even do that in the film.
Yeah.
Like he's very much physically, I won't say inferior, but
No, he is.
incapable compared to Eon, where you're like, oh, she's clearly his bodyguard, and there's no situation in which he's going to be protecting her. It's always going to be her protecting his physicality, even though he has the political power. And that's where I'm like, clearly the same people who can't do women game protagonists are the ones who can't do that movie narrative. But it's like, again, these are fictional people.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what the genitals are. So it's like, yeah, if this person is spawned out of a tube, or if Major Kusanagi's wearing fucking special armor, yeah, or it's like the swimsuit armor or whatever that allows her to go invisible, guess what? She's going to be able to do badass shit even if she doesn't have a dick. So it's like, it's insane to me that genitals ever really matter when it comes to like fictional characters. I mean, to me, it's never mattered, man. Like whether I was a kid or an adult.
With realistic human limitation-based characters, everyone should be afraid of the Major, because the Major is the most completely adept at hand-to-hand combat cyborg that's ever existed, to be upgraded into infinity. There's no greater adversary in fisticuffs than the Major, because she can take on Bato like he's a toy, and he's a great skilled fighter. But like the idea that the Major even exists, that some random person on the internet or anywhere is ever going to encounter a combat cyborg of that caliber, I mean, they better be in the military. They better be doing some really horrible shit. Like if Section 9 sends the Major after you, you've done something terrible.
Yeah,
that's the
reality. My problem with that film was the ScarJo whitewash, and not the actual. You know, if they like inserted someone else into that role and just like redid all the scenes, that movie would be fucking amazing. It's just a matter of like, at the time, they were trying to force ScarJo onto us, and it's like I don't think anybody in America responds well to having like personalities forced upon them, whether it's the LSD in the water or not. But it's like I just did the way that they did not force Charlize Theron on us, and she would just pop up in parts like on what's it called, Arrested Development.
Yeah.
Have you seen Old Guard?
Yeah.
Old Guard's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is like Charlize Theron is like the action star that happens to be a woman that can play these fucking parts, just like Jean-Claude Van Damme or like what's the name, Arnold, or any like. Dude, she's a better actress than Arnold is an actor.
She's a better actress, I believe, way better. She's a better actress than most of her action contemporaries when she's in an action role. Like her performance in Fury Road. Steals the show.
Perfect example.
She is the
perfect example.
Best part of that movie. The absolute best. Like when she realizes that the dark place was what she wanted was the green place, but it had become the dark nasty place, and she was crushed and like let out that moan. It's like, whoa, she's tapping into something serious. That's not the kind of thing we get with normal action actors.
Yeah, no. And that's a perfect example, because I think that film was like, you have Tom Hardy here, but you also have Charlize Theron, and neither one is like the dominant. If anything, she's the one that like, as when you come away from it, you're like, oh, if I had to have somebody on my side in a battle, I'd probably go with her based on what I just saw. Like, I know there's all this like joke writing and there's like the male view, but they don't make her out to be any less of a badass at the end of the story. If anything, she's more of a badass.
I'm pretty sure that Fury Road is the story of Mad Maxine. Like,
right.
Like that's her story.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
If you actually watch 100%. It with an open mind.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Bass Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.